Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. In this episode, we're taking a trip to 1980, right in the middle of the new wave scene, and we're talking about the fantastic third album from Squeeze, Argybargy. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you're new, welcome aboard. If you're returning, you know the deal. It's Dean behind the microphone. You have Eric on the other microphone somewhere connected. I think there's one long cord that connects us. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's like the tin can thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Unless I have technology
long
totally wrong. Unless I totally misunderstand how this works.
No, you don't. So
there is one
everyone.
long cable from my house to yours, right?
That's
that just
exactly
runs
right.
down 95. Okay.
That is exactly right.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I was worried. I thought I just didn't understand how things
There you
work.
go. Yep.
So thank you for joining us. Let's do our socials, right? If you're new, we've got some new exciting social media information. We just launched our Facebook group. So we have a page where we post all the great stuff, but now we also have a group where you can interact really directly, share music videos, share articles, post, participate in polls. 3324 podcast, the Facebook group. So head on over there if you haven't yet. It's the right thing to do. If you really like the content that we're doing, it's an even more intense extension of it.
I think
exciting.
Yeah, we've already got how many members so far?
A lot.
Yeah. Just within just a couple of days. We're in the 70s, right? I mean,
I wish the weather was. There we go, back to the weather.
Hey, I wasn't going to be the first one to talk about it. That's why I'm wearing double layers today.
We can't help it. It's just, this is what happens. This is what happens.
Well, I didn't want to start to go there with the, my back starting to hurt, this and that, and my aches and pains and my joints. No, we don't need to do that. So
anyway, I mean, we could just start taking Geritol. Do they even make Geritol anymore? Is that something that's made?
I'm sure there's probably 10 other alternate
or that stuff,
things or whatever.
Heat. Remember that stuff, Heat, that came in a bottle and it had like a cotton ball on the end of it, and your parents would like wipe it on their back or their leg, and it just burn.
That's right. Yep. And it was
dangerous. They don't make that anymore.
Like, what did it look like? One of those like shoe polish type bottles where it was like on a slant. Right.
It looked like a liquor bottle. It looked like a whiskey flask, and then you open it, and it had a wire with like a cotton ball on the end, and you would dip it in, and then you like mop it onto whatever hurt. You like slather it on.
Yeah,
we got to do a show about like old timey brands that are gone.
Sure, why not?
Maybe we'll save that for the live show. Is old. Old brands that are gone.
I'm not sure how many people would tune into that, but
they definitely would. They definitely would. Either just to remember or just gawk at the old people.
Yeah,
and say, that's gone. So for this business, if we keep talking, I don't know if we're ever going to squeeze this episode in.
Oh, here we go. There it is. The first pun of the night.
The first salvo has been volleyed. At Eric. Eric is like the troops storming Normandy and Saving Private Ryan, and I'm going to be lobbing puns from my pillbox forts.
And I'm constantly dodging. Either they're just flying over my head. Right?
And that's how it works, right? Some land and some miss by a mile.
That's right.
That's the way my jokes are.
That's right.
So we're talking about Squeeze.
Yeah.
In this episode, and their really great album, Argybargy.
Yeah.
Do you know what Argybargy means?
It's something to do with, I know it's an English term.
It's an English slang,
specific, meaning discussion, right? Or like
a lively discussion.
Like a lively discussion. Yeah. So that's the perfect.
That's what we're
Perfect, right.
having an Argybargy
Right.
right now.
That's right.
Right. We can actually use it in its proper context instead of as a title. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd ever use it anywhere else though. I think if I said that, people are like, oh, what?
Yeah.
If I said that to my boss at work, like, oh, I had an Argybargy with this customer, he'd be
like, what the hell is that?
What did you do? What did you do to them? What did you do? Were the cops there?
Come again? What was that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So that's the name of this album. It was their third album, released in February of 1980. In the U.S. side, it hit number 71, which not a big one, right? We usually talk, the stuff we usually talk about is like, oh, these classic albums. This is a classic album, and just really took a while, I guess. And it was the first album for Squeeze to chart in the U.S. I couldn't even find any sales information about it, so it was just kind of there. Produced by John Wood. Couldn't find anything about him either.
Yeah.
It's kind of really
the only thing I know is he produced their previous album, so they brought him back
and
to
he
produce it.
And he was an engineer for John Cale and a couple of other things, but really, this is like the low key of the low key albums.
This is very well. It's very, very British, and I think they wanted to keep it that way, right? They were just kind of like, and I think that was a concern. That the funny thing is that Chris Difford was living in New York at the time when he wrote the album. So I find it kind of odd that he's throwing out all these very, very British slang, these terms. Like, I have no idea what some of these songs are even mean.
I think that's a trademark of Squeeze.
Yeah.
Is there, which we'll probably get into, is about the lyrics and about Chris Difford, which is very interesting about it's what makes Squeeze very unique, I think.
Yeah.
Let's roll back to how did you get into Squeeze? I got in. Squeeze was one of those bands that I'd always heard of, right? Like in high school.
Yeah.
A lot of people seem to be into Squeeze, and I just heard about them, but I can't remember that I particularly maybe knew Tempted at the time.
Well, Tempted
all their other stuff was on the radio, but I don't remember like really engaging with Squeeze for me until 87.
Yeah, I mean, Tempted probably. I think it was one of those times where, I heard this album. I distinctly remember when I moved to Dobbs Ferry from Yonkers. It was around that time when like half the block was still being built. All the houses weren't being built, so house by house.
Did you move to Walnut Grove?
Pretty much,
Pa Ingalls.
Pretty much. When I moved to Ridge Road, Dobbs Ferry, there was like maybe 3 houses built in that neighborhood. So, we had met in 78, and but we only saw each other in school, right? Like, so we weren't really hanging out like in the summer. That was the Ridge Road gang. I had my cousins. I had whoever was moving in, who had just moved in. Their house was just finished, and it was new families coming in. And so this album was just on that, that playlist, that rotation of albums that like
really
Billy Joel, Glass Houses, and a few others like Rush, and some just circulating around. We all just hang out and just listen to this kind of stuff. And one kid in particular that I knew had a really impressive. At 14, he had this massive record collection, and I think that's probably the first time I heard the album.
Wow.
But I mean, these songs were like all over the radio, Another Nail in My Heart and Pulling Muscles. I mean, I love those songs to begin with, but then it's one of those things where it's like you get into into that kind of thing, and then you kind of forget about them for a while, right? And then Tempted came out, and I didn't put 2 and 2 together that this was the same band necessarily. Like, that's like I got into Paul Carrick, who I think he replaced Jules Holland. I think, because he came in on their next album, and Jules Holland, this was the last album with Jules Holland.
Correct. Yep.
And, Paul Carrick came in. And,
different
so
sound. Such a different vocal style and he drives that song Tempted. So it's kind of like, this is.
Yeah, it's more sort of R&B tinged. Yeah, he's got sort of that, blue-eyed soul kind of voice, The only album I actually ever owned by Squeeze was The Greatest Hits. It was 45s and under. I mean, that's a great compilation.
Yeah, it's one of the best. Great collection. Yeah, and I had gotten into them in 87 when because they kind of broke up for a couple of years, then reformed. And then in 87, they put out an album called Babylon and On.
Yes.
And there was a song called Hourglass, which they were playing that video all over MTV. They just played it all because there's such a clever videos, a lot of optical illusion stuff. So I kind of like, oh, wow, Squeeze. Okay. And I was like, I kind of dig this. And it kind of sounded like some of the other Squeeze stuff. So I got Babylon and On and just devoured that album. I absolutely loved it. And then I bought Singles 45s and Under, which is their greatest hits. And I was kind of like, oh, wow, okay. And then that kind of died down. It was kind of like, okay, there was my Squeeze. I had the greatest hits, and then I had the album that I really liked. And then Squeeze kind of soldiered on and didn't really kind of encounter them again until like the 2000s for some reason with this album. I think they came out with a special edition.
They re-released it in like 97.
Yeah, and I didn't catch it until even later than that. And then I just all of a sudden had it playing constantly and just like, wow. I was like, wow, this is just
I know
great.
where was this back in the day, right? Like I said, I had heard the album many, many times, but I didn't get it. I didn't have it. I didn't own it. I didn't need to because like I said, it was being played over and over. So, this was a really good choice actually that
this is actually a listener. Not only was this written on my list, but this is actually a listener request. Beth N requested this as well, but it also happened to be on my list. So this was an easy one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, back when you were listening to it, I guess I just wasn't cool for cats and into Squeeze. There's number 2.
There's number 2. Are we keeping score,
2.
by the way?
Somebody should.
Okay.
If you keep scoring this episode, if you're listening to this episode, how about we do this?
Okay.
How about we do this? If you're keeping score and listening to this episode, please go to our group and post. Let me know the number of puns that I land successfully in this episode.
Yeah, he's serious, folks. Do it.
It's on. So this is just a great album, and I think this, the previous album to this, Squeeze was formed in 1974, so they've been actually like kicking around as an idea for a while.
Yeah,
their first album, and this was a weird thing because it happened with another band too. They're called Squeeze, but in the United States and Canada, for their first album, they were known as Squeeze UK because it was another band. Or a couple of bands that it's not an uncommon name, but there was another band called Squeeze. So for US and Canada purposes, they were known as Squeeze UK.
Mm-hmm.
They did that with Wham also. When Wham first came out, they were called Wham UK.
That's right. Yep.
Because there was probably another band called Wham. So for the first album, they were Squeeze. And then after that, and that was in 78, 79. I mean, Squeeze had a basically almost like a 5-year run of albums every year, because then Cool for Cats came out, which was kind of like their breakthrough. It had Slap and Tickle, Up the Junction, which is a really great one, Goodbye Girl, Cool for Cats. So this one didn't do anything in the United States, but was cementing them overseas and in their home, home country.
Yeah, and that's where they, I guess, in the mind, I guess they at some point they wanted to get bigger and bigger, but I think they kept themselves so. I kind of like the idea of keeping it close to the chest, it's where you're from, you're proud of where you're from. And you just like, especially on this album, like we were talking about these throwing out all these references as if they don't care if you know it or not.
Yeah, if you get it, you get it. You don't, you don't.
Right. The music is that solid that that's what carries the album, for at least for me. Lyrically, it's like it's a puzzle box, because I'm like
talking about locations in England. I don't know where Clapham is, or like from Up the Junction, or I don't know that.
Right.
But when we're talking, we let's roll back a little bit, because we usually go through the group and who's in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for this, Squeeze for the most part is a 2-person endeavor, and maybe for the first three albums, it was a 3-person endeavor. So you've got Chris Difford, who is the lyricist, okay. Then you have Glenn Tilbrook, who writes the music. And then to a lesser degree, you had Jules Holland, and people may know Jules Holland from, he's got the show, it's on BBC, like Later with Jules Holland, and it's a music show.
Yeah.
But he was really one of the founding members of Squeeze. But for the most part, Squeeze is a 2-person entity. It's Difford and Tilbrook. And it's an interesting dynamic that they had well-defined roles. Chris Difford would write the lyrics, Glenn Tilbrook would write the music. Kind of like Bernie Taupin and Elton John.
Elton John, I was just about to say. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
And it kind of makes it makes for an interesting group dynamic, because you have a consistent type of lyricist and a consistent type of songwriting, as opposed to Styx, a bunch of members in the band, and they're each writing, and they have their own style, right?
Right.
This is kind of like, here's your job. You're going to write the lyrics, and I'm going to write the music. So you kind of get a consistent feel throughout their discography that's the relationship. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. When you have too many chiefs, as it were, like Fleetwood Mac, like the Eagles, like Styx, like a lot of these American bands, the more members they bring on, they're all of a sudden they're songwriters in themselves, and
everybody has to have a piece of the pie.
Their voices are, whether they can sing or not. Sometimes that's that doesn't matter. But as long as they're writing a song and they want to put their own stuff out there, then sometimes it's like, I want to do it. No, you
get the one cut per album type of thing, right? And that's what Jules. I mean, that's what led to Jules Holland leaving, is he was kind of getting cut out of the picture.
Yeah,
he wasn't stuff he wants to do and wants to express, and just wasn't happening for him because different. I mean, Different and Tilbrook they were compared to Lennon and McCartney.
Yeah, he kind of brought something a little bit different to the table, Jules Holland.
Oh yeah,
he's like this little like quirky sort of sort of light and fluffy piano pop kind of thing going on, and it's like
stuff, especially on this album. His one song, "Wrong Side of the Moon," is so great. It's like bouncy, it's jumpy, it's the vocal is kind of a little hammy, but it really works.
Yeah.
Because it's just that type of thing. He's got the great lyric is, I'm forgetting to remember to forget. So I love wordplay like that too, and especially if you could squeeze that lyric into a song, more power to you. It's just really clever. I like clever songwriting, and he really did it he had his one track and he really made the most of it. What I noticed about this album that's different from Cool for Cats that came before it, even though it was produced by John Wood and Squeeze, this album sounds different. This album has much more of a thicker and tighter and fuller sound to it. Cool for Cats kind of sounds a little thin. It sounds like underproduced. You can't really hear like bass. You get to Argybargy, and wow, it just is a great sounding album. It just really sounds well put together.
Very warm. There's a lot of that bass is heavy. I like that thick bass line where you can hear the bass, the line. That's what that rounds it out, man. I have to have that. I got to have that bottom end.
Oh yeah.
Like it just balances everything out. Right. So this album is in particular has that real great bass sound. So I'm surprised we didn't pick one of this guy for our bass players, but whatever. We're not gonna go there again.
Got no room. We got no room. There's no room at the inn.
It's just some really clever lines. Like he's got some really great lines on this album.
Oh, I mean, this is really like, want to call it new wave, you want to call it post punk, you want to call it pop. This is a great jangly album. Right. It's just, it starts off. I don't think you're going to find a stronger 1-2 punch and a stronger start to an album than Pulling Muscles from the Shell and Another Nail.
Oh my God.
Like they're just like they just really launched this album and kind of really set the table for it in a big way.
I love songs like that start with everybody just kicking in the vocal. There's no introduction. There's no instrumental
Pulling. Yeah, it's one of my. It's probably my favorite song by them.
It harkens back to people like the Beatles. I think of like All My Lovin'. It Won't Be Long. I think of
it just starts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We Can Work It Out is another one that comes to mind.
They definitely have their influences, and they're definitely adapting it to their sound. And Pulling Muscles from Michelle is like classics,
and that's confidence, man. That's having the whole band there. It's not like like the vocal just starts and then the band just sort of comes in one by one. They're all there, like from the get-go.
The song just like starts. Everyone's everyone's in from the first note.
That's right.
There's no run up. There's no like intro. There's no kind of working.
And then the
into
song
it.
just gets better and better from there, and it just gets thick and heavy. And like by the chorus, you're just kind of like, And I love that 2-ply
But
like Andy Summers when if you ever heard him sing,
yeah,
like, you know,
dude, you beat me to it. You beat me to it. I have something about that later, but the thing about Squeeze also, which I didn't realize when I would hear them back when I was younger, is on a song like this or Another Nail from the Heart, is that when Difford and Tilbrook sing, Chris Difford, the songwriter, he's got like a kind of like a it's kind of like a scratchy. It almost sounds like someone singing with a sore throat. But they meld their voices so close together that sometimes it sounds like one person who's inflecting the vocal a certain way. Yeah, like it almost sounds like Glenn Tilbrook is doing something with his voice to make it scratchy, but that's actually Chris Difford underneath. And they're so you have to listen. You really have to listen to this album to hear two people singing perfectly that sound totally different, and it sounds like one voice. It is almost hard to pick it out that they're so close and on top of each other singing in sync that sometimes it sounds like one voice with a person with like a scratchy voice underneath.
Well, he's got like a double like vocal cord or something. Like he's two.
I always thought it was. I thought that was the sound. It was like one dude. It was like, he's got like a scratchy voice when he does that. It's like, no, that's two people. Really amazing. And then you get Another Nail in My Heart is just, if we do, I'm going to tip my hand. If we ever do a top 5 guitar solos, I'll tell you right now, this is probably number 1. The guitar solo in Another Nail in My Heart is one of the tastiest guitar solos ever. It is one of the most well thought out, and it's got so many different styles of playing in it. Yeah. Like he shows that he can do the fast stuff. He does some double stops. He just there's so much going on in that little solo wrapped in this pop song that I always haven't been in love with the solo in that song. Yeah. It's just so smart and just really, there's a lot there, but you get fooled because you're listening to this like poppy song and you really don't take notice of it almost. Yeah. You're right. I would totally agree with that. That would definitely be on a list. The musicianship is just top notch on this album. I mean, they're all just a level above, some of the other new wave bands that are out there. So some of this other stuff was a little bit raw and, kind of a little bit more punk, but they managed to find that perfect balance of pop and just, slightly more contemporary, but scaling it back. And then, you go to another song and it's like really, it just kind of rocks out. Right. So I love songs like Misadventure. Oh yeah. One of my favorites off the album. In fact, I would have released that as a single rather than Farfisa Beat. Farfisa Beat. Sorry. See, getting old. But well, what the hell is that anyway?
But that was
it's another one we don't know. We don't know what that means anyway.
I have no idea. But yeah, I love Misadventure. That's enough. And then on the re-release too, there's a song called Go, which I really dig. And that could have been on the album too. Back in the day, that would have been. But yeah, it's solid. It's and again, I like these kinds of songs that just kind of, it takes you back too. It's like it's a very specific time in my life where I'm thinking about this sound, right? It was like all over the radio, and you had bands like the Police, but Squeeze was kind of like, I don't know, they would. I don't know how, if you could even compare the two. You could, I suppose, because they were kind of doing the same. I mean, Squeeze had the pop stylings, right? I mean, they really we were drawing lines directly to the Beatles, and I don't think that's an accident. I think their influence was there, and adapting it to what this new wave sound was, or whatever you want to call it. Whereas the Police were doing pop music, but they were coming from more the reggae, the ska, right? They were exploring it. They were doing more. Stuart Copeland said they were doing more prog. So they were looking at it from a different standpoint. And you've got also, like I said, you've got Difford and Tilbrook that are of one mind. It's basically like one songwriter, right? One half of the brain is writing the words, and the other half is writing the music, and they're not interfering with that. It's like that's the relationship. So I think you've got a kind of like two powerhouses making one songwriter.
right? And they're not fighting over it. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to write this, I'm going to write that.
No,
it's like,
that's
no,
the dynamic.
here's the lyrics, you do the music, and we're good. Farfisa, by the way, Farfisa is a organ manufacturer. So that's why, because it figures heavy in that keyboard figures heavy in it. But the song Separate Beds, which is after Another Nail from My Heart, very much like Up the Junction. It's almost like a sequel to Up the Junction, which was from, one of their earlier albums. And it's, and Chris Difford kind of like, all these songs are like slice of life songs. They're always like a story. Yeah. And it seems like they all come from his life. Like, what's going on? My mother didn't like her mother didn't like me, type stuff, but really kind of,
but very real, like very
story oriented, not just kind of throwaway, so you've got some interesting lyrics, and then you've got music that, especially with this, is just such a peppy album.
Yeah.
It really just kind of like goes, like once it starts, it really doesn't slow down until like, and this the last song on the first side is a little slow. I think I'm go, but it's all good stuff.
I mean, it is, but this is one of those albums too, though, where I feel like the hits are the best songs. And some, me, I'm always going for I'm always looking for that deep cut that's better than the hit, right? You try to look for, because, certain bands, they just go there. They know how to draw that out. And I dig when a band can be able to do that. But in this case, I mean, I think the hits are just so good.
You said Misadventure. If you're looking for a deep cut, I'd go with Vicky Verky. I really like that. That's like another, it's just like another great one. I mean, this was kind of like lightning in a bottle for them, because, Cool for Cats was kind of a little, strange, a little more dancey. Like it almost seemed like it had a lot of like disco-y influence. And then they pull together the production here. The songwriting is tight. The musicianship is tight. And then just every song is just like boom, 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 boom. Like I said, and then you've got If I Didn't Love You, which was another squeeze.
I love that one.
Hit.
Yeah.
Another big one. So 3 from this album that hit, made it onto the greatest.
Those vocals, right? It's
like melding. It sounds like one person, right? It just sounds like one person that's got an interesting vocal style. Very, very interesting. Speaking of interesting vocal styles, I've got something for everybody to listen to, and I bring this up when I speak about this album usually. Most notably in the song "Pulling Muscles from the Shell." You have to. I'm going to ask everybody, re-listen to this song, but really listen to the vocals. And especially listen to Glenn Tilbrook. He does something very interesting on this album and a couple of others in the way he finishes words. Usually when singers finish words, they kind of trail off, right? Okay. The fun experiment, or the fun thing to do with this album is listen to every time Glenn Tilbrook sings a lyric, the last word of the lyric that ends in a T. He like over pronunciates every like T. Like finishes words like specifically with an emphasis on the last consonant. It's very interesting, and it's a strange way of singing, because usually when singers sing, they just kind of, the words just kind of trail, and you don't really finish like hard consonants. Yeah. Listen to Pulling Muscles from a Shell. It's an interesting experiment.
Yeah, you're right.
Just to put that out there.
I'm kind of closing my eyes.
I really like it about him.
It's going through my head right now, and I know what you're talking about. Yep, I can see it.
Yeah. So okay. You mentioned Andy Summers from The Police, and you compared him to Chris Difford. And I specifically wrote down, see, Chris Difford has one lead vocal song on this album. So he writes everything, but usually, Glenn Tilbrook is the lead. But he sings one song, Here Comes That Feeling. Yeah. And I wrote, here's what I wrote in my notes. Here Comes That Feeling. Sounds like something Andy Summers would do in The Police.
Yeah. That's immediately what I thought of.
It's like that strange, like Andy Summers is not a vocalist, right? No. Like he can sing, but he's not a vocalist. So when he does stuff, it tends to skew towards strange, like the strange stuff within The Police. Yeah, is going to be Andy Summers,
right? And Chris
Difford is writing all that. He's writing all this stuff. It's not a different voice per se. It's just the way he sings is so different. Because he's got like this crunchy, like, type of voice, right? It's like he just woke up from like a weekend out, and then he has to go sing. Yeah, but he sounds like that all the time.
Yeah, Andy Summers is more avant-garde. If you ever heard any of his like solo and that, it's just weird stuff. I mean, the only thing I can think of is Mother off of Synchronicity, and that's just he's just screaming his bloody head off. But
he's got that one about the blow up doll too.
But yeah.
This is Andy Summers, that is not
right,
not Squeeze, but Andy Summers. I forget what album it's on.
Right.
It's before Zenyatta Bandati.
He's got a very interesting guitar style too, which I love. Which is, it's too bad that we didn't get more of that in the Police. I think Sting kind of just figured
he just overwhelmed them.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, it's interesting that Chris Difford is the lyricist, but when he sings a song, it just sounds so different.
Yeah, it's
like the inflections and his vocal style or his voice is just very different.
No,
it's good for that bottom. It's good as an adjunct to the lead, because it kind of fills in the bottom and it makes it really interesting. But if you want to listen, Cool for Cats, he sang, which is a popular. If you're looking at the greatest hits, you want to hear Chris Difford, you can listen to Cool for Cats as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then Wrong Side of the Moon, like we said, Jules Holland, who's just like almost like the court jester of Squeeze, kind of like the guy who really kind of jumping around and having fun, and not, in this kind of band, it's great.
Yeah.
Because he brings that energy
right
that Squeeze needed.
It's no wonder that he wanted to become this sort of larger than life type of figure. He wants to be on TV. He wants to play around, and he's very lively, and he's that kind of thing. So yeah, it's no wonder that and God bless him. I mean, he was very successful doing his own show, and that show's, I think, is it still on?
I don't know. I mean, he did a lot of session work. I mean, he worked with Sting, Clapton, Mark Knopfler, George Harrison. So he was in on that whole, big in Britain, not big in the United States, but beloved in the UK. He's just one of those characters that kind of never
blokes.
One of the ones that you never hear of here, but in his home country, he's like a national treasure, Jules Holland.
Sure.
He's absolutely loved. So it's just one of those things. And then he would leave after this album, like we said, and then kind of like the Joe Walsh of England, Paul Carrick, like the hired gun, comes in.
Yeah.
For their following album, East Side Story, and basically stays for one album. Does they do Tempted, which was like probably their most iconic hit, I would guess. It's probably the one that still gets played the most. I think Tempted you probably hear, like on oldies radio. I think you'll still hear that.
But it's still very Squeeze though, isn't it? Right, even though it's a different vocal altogether. Like I said, it's like he's got that more soulful voice, but yet it's still very, very Squeeze. It's got that jangly, like that ting, to the song, and I mean, and that's when we came to know Squeeze. Like we recognize that as Squeeze rather than the band that. Is it Squeeze? Yeah, I think so. Pulling Muscle, it's the same band. Whoa, shit. We didn't know.
Sounds like them.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, very, and talking about East Side Story, which was the follow up to this, which we're talking about. Chris Difford said that was one of the two greatest albums that Squeeze made. Mm-hmm. I would venture to guess that Argybargy is probably the first one.
Yeah,
because this one is just
I think he said he was worried about getting too popular. He wanted to become successful, but it's like he's saying, but he was a little afraid of the success and what it might bring to the band. And, because like I said, like we said, they're wearing it very close to the chest, where they're from, and just not, we're not going to accommodate other people by conforming to the US market, by writing songs that, that are very, very American kind of thing, like some other British acts do. They just
they certainly were not. They were not trying to talk about Chicago and and San Francisco and like none of that. Although they do mention Jersey in Up the Junction, but in another, we were talking about the Police. There actually is a connection between the Police and Squeeze. Oddly enough, that's Miles Copeland. Stuart Copeland's brother is a manager. He manages bands, and he managed the Police, managed Sting as a solo artist. He's also the manager for Squeeze. Mm-hmm. So oddly enough, there's that connection. And Miles Copeland actually did not want these guys to name this album Argybargy. They're like, no. People in America, no one is going to know this. It is so like obscure to UK that no one outside of is going to know what it means. And they're like, so what?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
We know what
It's
it
a
means.
word.
So that's,
yeah. As long as they can pronounce it, it's like who cares?
Well,
so
did we know Zenyatta Mandata? I mean,
I don't even still know what that means.
I mean, synchronicity. Did we even know what that word was before the album? I
think I had a better shot at synchronicity. It kind of sounded like something I might know. Zenyatta Mandata. I don't know what that means.
Yeah. So I mean,
they were getting all. Yeah. So he's getting mad about Argybargy.
Argybargy, to me,
that's you know why? Because Sting didn't come up with it. That's why
when you hear the term Argybargy, I immediately think of Squeeze. I immediately think
there's no other
sound.
Yeah,
right. It is theirs. It's their. It's almost like they coined the term. Like
because no one knows. Yeah, because no one in the States knows what it means. So as far as you're concerned, it's more an album title than it is an actual word.
Yeah.
Although it's a word elsewhere, for us, it's an album title that we really don't know. But hopefully, in this episode, you have learned what it means.
They talk about fish and chips and sticklebacks and all this kind of thing, and it's just like, okay, like
we're having an Argybargy right now. Stuff. This is just an amazing, just one of those. This is one of those ones that's an easy listen to. It's a quick album. It's all, for the most part, like up tempo pop.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a problem with that, and if you're not, what's Squeeze has a lot of great songs, right? What should be the album outside of the greatest hits, right? Because for me, greatest hits are a shortcut. Or they're a good entree, right? It kind of sets the table. You get to hear, with greatest hits albums, you get to hear a wide swath of their catalog, as it were.
Right. Well, with a band of this caliber, though, you want to hear more.
And I think this is the one.
Yeah.
I think this is the one, because this
is their definitive album. Sure.
Yeah. Because they only had, before they broke up the first time, quote unquote, mm-hmm. they only had a 5-album run. I mean, they did, this was their third album. East Side Story was fourth, and then Sweets from a Stranger, which had one of my favorites, Black Coffee in Bed.
Yeah.
Which is probably the runner up for favorite vocal performance by them, and just favorite
all the time.
Yeah,
they played
just
it
favorite
every hour almost. It was that was another one. Sure.
Yeah. So if you're looking for like prime Squeeze era, it's this one, because it sits right in the middle of their discography. They put out 2, they put out this, and then they put out 2 after. Broke up for like 3 years, then kind of reformed, and kind of got back into it. Like I said, with 87, with Babylon and On, they kind of had a bit of a resurgence, mm-hmm. which is where I pretty much jumped on the train from there.
Did Jules Holland join? He came back.
He rejoined for Babylon and On.
That's right. Yeah.
Or maybe the album before that, which was Cozy.
It was
like a Tutti Frutti.
Yes. Yep.
They have such strange.
Carrick would come back later on, though. Too. They'd make another album with Carrick, I believe. There was another song that he did that wasn't quite as popular on one of their later releases, I believe.
Yeah. Well, in what year was it? Like 2000. God, was it 2017? No, it wasn't 2017. Squeeze did an album called Spot the Difference.
Yes.
Because basically it's 2010. They don't own the rights to any of the songwriting. I guess, when you're young and you get the contract, you basically sign your life away for like the potential glory. They don't own the rights to the record. So they said, you know what, we're going to go redo like all of our greatest stuff again, but we're not only going to redo it, but we're going to try and redo it exact. Hence where Spot the Difference comes in, is their intent was to not just redo it, but to redo it exactly. And they came pretty close. And Paul Carrick did return.
Tempted. I couldn't tell. That's the one song where I could not tell the difference.
Yeah, he did really good. I mean,
his vocal on that is there's no distinction for me. So anyway,
if you want something fun to listen to, Spot the Difference is their greatest hits, basically, but redone, and mainly a labor of love for Glenn Tilbrook. He's the one that kind of really oversaw the project and really was going to get it as exact as possible. And he did a pretty good job, considering that in 2010, a lot of this stuff was 30 years old, give or take. His vocals are pretty close. If you just played something from Spot the Difference without playing one of the original ones, someone might be, oh yeah, that's that song by Squeeze. Yeah. And not be like, why does that sound strange or different? Because he really got it pretty close.
And they got the mixes right too.
The instrumentation, everything.
It's very, very close.
They didn't fool with the arrangements. They literally said, we're going to do it the way it was done to see how close we can come, like as a fun experiment, not just, we're going to reimagine it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, we're just going to spot the difference. See if you can. and
yeah,
they
have
really
some fun with
really
it.
did.
And they knew
Yeah.
that. They just like, let's put it out and let's do that. Unlike some other artists who tried it and they didn't quite.
Yeah, well, like Jeff Lynne, right? I mean, I hate to keep going back to this guy, but he redid his greatest hits, but he redid it on his terms. I don't think this, this sounded right. Yada yada yada. I'm going to re-record it, and it's not uncommon for some of these artists to go back to their catalog and take another crack at it for one reason or another. So I appreciate that Squeeze did it, but with an intent of we're going to try and really fool you and get it as close as we can and see.
I remember the Fix put out the Then and Now type of release where it was a few of their tracks that they redid, and some of them were like just total like revamps or just different arrangements altogether, acoustic versions and that kind of thing. But there were a few that they tried to do like Squeeze, where it was almost to be exact, and they came close as well. But it's another one of those bands that's just sort of, I used to love, in the 80s. This is like mid 80s at this point.
Yeah, I think the Fix is very underrated. Yeah. I mean, when I hear them, I'm like, wow, I'll
love their stuff.
Come across their stuff, and I'm like, wow, okay, that was a song by the Fix. That was another one. That was, Red Skies at Night, Saved by Zero. Like so many. I'm like, wow, I really didn't realize that they were that.
I just
ingrained into the 80s as far as what I was hearing.
That once I just love that riff. That bring. That's the 80s for me. Like that is like
Standard. What was that?
Standard Fall.
Standard Fall.
Yep. Love
that is quintessential 80s. Absolutely. Yep. And they're right in the mix of this too. I mean, they're in that whole new wave, post-punk, the whole thing that was coming from England, and we call it the second British invasion.
I think they were a little bit more serious. I mean, their songs were a little slightly more on the somber, more political side of things, but we started to go there. U2, the emergence of U2 and that kind of thing. But I love them too. So Modern English was another band that they kind of came and went, you learn to really appreciate these. I don't even want to call them synth pop bands. I used to think of them that way, but not really, because when you consider somebody like, there's still a lot of guitar. There's still a lot of they're very like Squeeze. They're not what you think they are. There's a lot of keyboard, sure, but it's not like the overly processed.
It's not Flock of Seagulls. It's not Flock of Seagulls keyboards.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I was thinking about that the other day when listening to this. I'm like, you talk about 80s music and everybody immediately thinks drum machines and a lot of that stuff was in use, but it was still just pop. Like everyone thought it was so weird at the time. Everyone thought this stuff was so weird. But when I listen to that stuff now, I'm like, it's just a pop song. It just happens to be using the technology of the time.
And a lot of those
new. It was new technology at the time, so it seemed like it was something different. But these were all just pop songs.
Well, I've come to realize too that those were the one-hit wonders. Yeah, that were more like the synth-heavy kind of stuff, like Flock of Seagulls. I mean, they only they didn't really do that much. These songs sort of came and went, and they were big hits, and there still are. But I come to realize that a lot of that stuff is just like the sort of like the 70s, right? There's a lot of those bands that employed everything in their songs, like strings and horns and these big lush productions, right? You know what I'm saying?
Did you ever do the safety dance, Eric? No, you sure?
Oh my God!
Talk about quintessentially 80s.
Goodness!
It was the safety dance. Right? No one knew what the hell that meant either. No one knew what these songs meant. It was just like the stuff was like listening to. It was like, what is the? Everyone's walking around the safety dance in schools. Like, okay, what is that? Is that is this a fire drill? Is it what do we mean safety dance? What is happening? Give me my sticks, give me my journey, and push me in the corner and let me be closed off.
Right?
But no, it was great stuff. It was just so much of it. It was like, how do you pick?
Yeah.
And Squeeze was just kind of there. Like they're like, if you talk about classic rock, right? We talk like Journey. We talk about like American classic rock, Journey, Styx. I would put Squeeze in that era for the UK. I would put them like in that pantheon for the new wave or what was coming out of at that time. They were kind of like that band. They were like that reliable band for those 5 albums that was putting out that kind of solid material.
Yeah.
Didn't vary too much. And that's not necessarily a bad thing for them, because they kind of understood what their wheelhouse was because they had the 2 songwriters that were working in tandem. It's really it's like smart pop music. And that's really what this is kind of like it's ear candy, but in the best way. because this is just popping and jump. This album's just like popping, jumping, moving.
Yeah.
And you just kind of take the trip and you can remember what it was like. And it really is. I mean, I think that for some reason, I thought this came out later than 1980. It didn't feel like 1980.
No, it sounds like
felt
a more
like 82,
solid,
83.
solid effort.
I mean, not that it's such a big difference, but I just didn't realize it was that early into the whole new wave thing of the 80s and what was on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were kind of before that whole electronic drum machine thing. So they were kind of like you said, a lot of comparisons to the Police, but I think those comparisons make sense, not musically, but where they stood and where their position was in that new wave and in that wave of music that was coming in, because they were both kind of coming up around that same time.
Yeah.
You know, Squeeze, their first album was 78. The Police was around that time as well.
And we talked about REM too, right? Being that sort of the smart type of music. You know, they were very much of their time as well, but then they reemerged later on within the 90s with something even better. So those different stages, you know, of a band that lasts. Squeeze unfortunately didn't last as long, but
well, there's I mean, they kind of
they kind of come and go, but they just
exactly.
But
it's a rotating list of members now, so it's become, for all intents and purposes, a 2-person touring concern with.
Well, they even had they put out I think they put out a couple of solo records, right?
After Squeeze quote unquote broke up, they put out an album called Different in Tilbrook, which
there you
may as well be a Squeeze album. So they it's strange. They break up in what, 82.
Mm-hmm.
In 84 they release an album called Different in Tilbrook, which is them two, and then 85 they reform Squeeze. What was the point?
I don't know. Maybe I mean, it's the sense of loyalty to the other members, I suppose. But you know,
but then it just started cycling through It became like it became a revolving door of like sidemen, basically, kind of like Steely Dan, right? Steely Dan started out as a group, and then by the time you got to the end, it was just 2 people basically, and then people were just coming in and they were auditioning and using people,
like 10cc too, Godley and Cream. Yeah, so they were a big deal.
Kind of the same type of thing. It's just kind of at some point, like the cream rises to the top, and it was these 2 guys. You know, when everyone's leaving, they're the main drivers anyway, right? They're the Townsend and Daltrey, or whoever you want to do it, Jagger and Richards, whatever 2 you want to make.
It's better. Elton John and Bernie Taupin, I think, is the perfect.
Oh yeah, just from the way the relationship
comparison.
Is, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
He was
about it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And it's a relationship that still exists too, which I find, incredible that all these years that somebody could just work like that so closely together without any. I'm sure they had their ups and downs, but it's just like,
you're talking about Bernie Taupin and Elton John now, or
yes,
okay.
But it could be the same thing too, like Different in Tilbrook as well. I mean, I'm sure they had their differences, but it's just so cool to think that somebody could work.
They did have their differences, but can you spot the difference?
What is that? 5, 6? Is that 6?
Maybe
now?
not.
I think 6. I got 6. I think. Total.
You say 6?
Unless Dean has a couple more up his sleeve before we close out, but
I don't know. We'll have to see. Someone's going to have to be listening and counting and marking off each one as we go to it. So,
oh goodness.
I think that's going to do it for this one. This was a great album, a really quick listen, easily accessible. Right. There's not going to be any big stretches. And again, this is one of those ones that really goes fast because everything is so up tempo that you're flipping. If you're listening on vinyl, you're like flipping the album over before you even know it. You're like flipping it over. And it's one of those ones that,
and it's like I said it before, it's it evokes a very special period. Nothing major happened in my life at that point, but it was just a really nice memory of, just meeting new people and just we were just getting into music at the time. And it's a very special, you hear these songs and it takes you back in that way. So it kind of, there's a sentimentality to it. There's a nostalgic aspect to it.
Yeah. And I didn't know that about you. I didn't know that was so early on for you. I thought I assumed like me, it was kind of like I was way outside the curve on this one, and I'm sorry, and it kind of, it just goes to show you. It's kind of like we never talked about Squeeze.
Right.
We never said, what about that?
It's like, but it's like, it's like a lot of other bands around at the time. Like they were there, like Zeppelin. It's like you don't over promote them. You don't really talk about them because who's going to dispute it, right? They're just there in the soundtrack, in the cloud, as it were. And then the people that we did get into were the people that we knew that people probably wouldn't like as much.
Yeah, they're probably cloud. Those are clouds for somebody else.
Exactly.
Right? They're the ones, oh yeah, I know them. So it's, and I just thought this was, I learned a lot. I didn't realize that it was so early for you.
Yeah.
And so late for me. And that's like I said, I've said it before. Old music is new if you've never heard it before. Doesn't make a difference. If you've never heard it before, it can be a revelation to no matter when it came out. And that's the beauty.
I totally agree.
The beauty
with
of
that. I'm still going back. I'm still hearing new things, even stuff that I know really well. I go back and I listen, and I'm hearing something so completely different in the song, or it's not what I thought it was, or very rarely am I disappointed in anything, or very rarely am I saying, oh, this doesn't hold up. Like it just, there's nothing like it. Nothing like it.
Yeah. There's a new artist that you may not have heard of. His name is Elvis Presley. And he's got a lot of records out that I don't know if you've heard them, but you may want to go back and check those out as well.
Huh? No, it's true. You're right though.
It's true.
You're kind of joking, but it's so true. There's stuff that I've never heard, and they keep putting this stuff out, churning all this posthumous, these releases out, and some of these songs are great.
So much music, so little
much
time.
Music, exactly.
It's true. It's how do you pick? So hopefully this episode has helped you pick. Mm-hmm. Highly recommended. I don't think there's an episode where we don't say something's highly recommended. So that's retreading old territory, but it really is. If you're looking for squeeze, if you're looking for something from the early 80s, that's not it's not the technical stuff and all the synthesizers. It's not that, but it's from that era. It's actually just kind of a little bit before. Argybargy is the one for you. And you've joined us for our Argybargy as we discussed this great album. You can find us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook. We're at 3324 Podcast there. We're at Twitter also at 3324P. And like I said in the beginning, we've got a Facebook group that you can now join and interact with fellow listeners and interact with us directly. Share what you like about music and film as well. We do both, so you can really pick your poison. You want to talk about film? We're there for you. You want to talk about music? We're there for you as well. We've got the two cans with the string, so we can communicate with you very easily. So, for Eric, this has been Dean. Thank you for joining us. We will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 Podcast and on Twitter at 3324P to join the conversation.